Good afternoon, Dakota State. We'll ask people to find their seats and we'll get started with the keynote here. Thanks very much. What a week. If you haven't done this as you were getting a snack, take a deep breath. We made it. We're almost halfway through everything that's going to happen this week. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pete Hazing. It is my pleasure on a daily basis to serve as Associate VP for Research and Economic Development here at DSU. I work over there in the lovely Madison Cyber Labs building, and it's quite a privilege to work there with our VPR, Ashley Podrodsky, and a wonderful team that tries to facilitate research and stimulate economic development on this campus. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, I've got a few thanks that need to go around. First, President Griffiths and Provost Hoy made the decision last year to suspend classes for the afternoon of the annual research symposium. It's the single biggest needle mover we've ever had in terms of attendance at this event. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this event has almost doubled in size since last year, in part because of that, and also in part because of a new addition of creative activities that we had right over here in this classroom. So thank you very much to President Griffiths and Provost Hoy for that move. And to our undergraduate research director, Andrew Sathoff, who brought that idea to the provost's office. Thanks, Andrew. I want to thank Wendy Romero and Peter Britton and Eric Peterson, who were probably the first people in the building this morning in order to help implement that new creative component. I've been at DSU since summer of 2017, and I began very early on to rehearse the phrase research and creative activity, by which we mean not only enacting new ideas in the world through our applied research, but also producing creative output through the background research and creative work that we do. And this is really the biggest presence of creative activity that we've had at this event since then. So we have Wendy and Peter and Eric and their colleagues and students to thank for that. We have a couple of different things. So that was a juried exhibition, which is a peculiar form of peer review that's important to artists and creatives. And then we also had adjudicators for the poster session. And I'm not going to read that entire list of names. I just want to lift them up by saying that is also a really important form of peer review. And we cannot improve the state of our research without a lot of different forms of peer review. So thank you to those people. We had, for the second or third time as part of this event today, a presence from North Dakota State University, who's our prime grantee on a project called National Science Foundation I-Core, which helps to translate research ideas into the marketplace. And Andy Behrens and Mike Roach run that program on our campus. They were joined today by Paula Abul from NDSU, and we're very grateful to have her with us. We can't do this without feeding people and moving chairs and promoting the event and doing all kinds of things that it would be a really bad idea to send an academic to do. I really want to thank our event staff. We recently brought the event staff at Dakota State University under the auspices of marketing and communications. It's been an absolutely brilliant structural move, in my opinion. And Miranda's the queen of details. Thank you so much for everything, Miranda. Yeah, lift Miranda up, absolutely. Bryn, Autumn, everyone who works on events as part of that staff, and the entire marketing communications staff. In particular, I have made somewhat of a hell week for Jenna and Andrea and Joe, who manage graphics and printing and website, because I keep throwing curveballs and changes at them. Which you all throw at me, and I am kind enough to pass along to them. So really, can we get a round of applause for event staff and marketing communications? Finally, I don't think the food has ever been better at this event. Can we give a round of applause to the catering staff? I did not expect to go up into that room today and find Puerto Rican mofongo, but I was delighted when I did. Yeah, and I heard from several students from the Caribbean who were delighted about that as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Senior Executive, Board Chair, and Strategic Advisor, Philip Niedermair. We've had a wonderful day together. I picked up Philip this morning at the Best Western, and we've had some time with our research staff. We had some time, a couple of different deans, with some lab directors, and moving around campus. He had some time this afternoon with President Griffiths. Philip's a hard guy to introduce because he's done so many different things. But
I can't keep a job.
Yeah, we know better than that. I think it's probably safe to sum this up by saying Philip's a guy who had a brilliant career in the private sector, working with credit card companies and understanding their technology and cyber strategy, and then drew on deep roots in the American Armed Services in his own family, which has its own really interesting story, and wanted to really contribute to that national mission in the wake of 9/11. And so I'll let him tell you more about that, but today's conversations have really been about his role within the Technology Advancement Center in DC, and with Faction Networks, with whom we're working on a new agreement with some of our faculty and students to do work on a zero trust environment and some of their hardware. And Philip works across both of those public and private domains, and also in the nonprofit sector. It's a rare opportunity to hear from somebody who works across all three of those domains. And I'm really excited to hear Philip's talk about cyber and tech leadership issues writ large. So let's give a warm DSU welcome to Philip Niedermair.
Thank you very much. You know, it's always a little worrying when people introduce you, and Pete did such a marvelous job. Thank you very, very much. It's been lovely spending the morning with him and the team here. I've enjoyed my morning, and I was grateful for the time particularly spent with Jim Cahill, Bill Bendix, Stacey Berry, Mary Bill, and President Griffiths just now. Thank you so much. Your dedication to our shared mission is vital and most inspiring. Ashley, Pete, and Beth, thank you for coordinating my visit here, setting up my schedule, and even arranging the hotel over there. It's a very nice hotel, very professional staff, and really keen to take care of me, so it makes all the difference. Please remember, as I talk to you today, my remarks today are my own, and I have to emphasize that because I actually work in some sensitive places, and some of the remarks I might make today might not be appreciated. But they're mine on my behalf only, and although I do speak at times on behalf of my clients and the relationships I represent, today I speak only on my behalf, however humdrum that might just be. Before I begin a speech, when I'm speaking in public, I always thank leaders and name leaders who have allowed me to serve them, and that mission has been so vital in my life, transformative. To be able to be part of a team that's seeking to save humanity is a fairly nice place to sit, as long as you're willing to take the responsibility on. And I was fortunate enough to be brought into the NSA in 2008 to support a critical mission, and that continues today, although all the work I do for them is in an unofficial capacity. Nothing secret or so on, but much engaged with the private sector. First, I'd like to thank and recognize Dick Schaefer. With those of you in cybersecurity should know that name. He was the last information assurance director, is how we used to refer to as cyber. I like that description far better than cybersecurity, as it happens. Dick is my mentor and really has given me the framework for my career within this industry, and I talk with him almost every day still. He's been retired for 15 years, but he is still the global leader in our industry. Lieutenant General Rhett Hernandez, who you should know, created Army Cyber Command itself. The Army has its own cyber command. He took it from 2 people to 14,000 in like 10 months. And when he retired, it was said of him that by General Cardone, who was taking his command over, that he took the Niagara Falls of data and put it through 7 straws, and indeed he did. I also must recognize my dear friend, my colleague, Chris Inglis, the former National Cyber Director and the Deputy Director of the NSA. Chris is actively working today. When he retired from the NSA, he took on the task of joining the United States Cyberspace Solarium Commission and being one of the commissioners. The 2 co-chairs were Congressman Gallagher and Senator King, and we created the framework for the nation and for our allies to a very large extent on how cybersecurity should be managed in society and business, in defense and in not-for-profits and in academia. And it really is a vital piece of work. If you are in our industry, you should familiarize yourself with it. Lastly, and by no means last because he's least, Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery has been all over the news. Some of you may know of him now because he is an expert on that strait that's so famous right at this moment. As an admiral, he has commanded that strait. The Strait of Hormuz is what I refer to. But he is also and was the executive director of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and I work for him informally. While you may not know these names, I recognize them because I wish you to know them. They have been my inspiration and are globally renowned in our industry, and hold an ethical standard that is not only rare, but tantamount to the extraordinariness that we require to achieve the challenges that we are faced with. I also want to make some remarks. You know, I came from RSA, as some of you may know. That's one of the largest cybersecurity conferences in the world, if not the largest. And I cut my visit there 2 days short to serve our dear President Griffiths. It's an honor to be here, and I mean that. It's always an honor to speak in front of students. And while I was at some entertainment venues, I mentioned I was coming here to my good friends, Chris Inglis and Admiral Rogers, the NSA director. I'm not close to Admiral Rogers, but he's a great chap. He has not influenced my life specifically. He has influenced all of ours. They wanted me to send their greetings to you. And they said, I asked them, are there any remarks that you'd like to share with the audience I'll be speaking to? And they asked me to relay these 2 messages. First, Admiral Rogers said, the former director of the NSA and Cyber Command, and he said this before I told him the topic of my speech. And you'll understand that when I tell you the topic of my speech. We're holding that secret just a moment. He said, let the students know that we will win this because of innovation and our ability to innovate, and because of our willingness to take risk, and most importantly, our willingness to invest capital. As long as this does not change, we will win. He added that caveat at the end. I think it's important that we realize if you looked at those 3 things and said what America is lacking at the moment, sadly we're lacking capital because we have invested so much and we made so many mistakes. So it is the one part that is less flexible than it used to be that does concern me. Secondly, Chris Inglis wanted me to remind you that cyber is a team sport and asked you to note the following. What if to beat one of us, they had to beat all of us? That's how cybersecurity should work. Lastly, before I begin my speech, some brief thoughts on leadership. And of course, leadership, in my view, begins with kindness, respect, integrity, and tenacity. And the 4 powerful tools over my career that I have used to help me with these have been a focus on a training platform that a friend of mine created called Rear Admiral Paul Becker. You can look him up, great chap. He was the J2 for the Joint Chiefs, very, very knowledgeable man, and a cancer survivor like myself. And he helped me during that time too. And he has the 3 T's, and I live by that: teamwork, tone, and tenacity. The second thing that since a little boy I have held in great regard is a famous poem by Rudyard Kipling, If, which really lays out how life should be and the risk we should be willing to take. Thirdly, influenced by Eisenhower, I had the great and distinct privilege of being on the Eisenhower Memorial Presidential Commission for about 8 years as we were building the memorial in DC. And Eisenhower was famous for planning. And he said, plan until you don't have to plan anymore. Plan so you don't have to do catch up. Plan so that catch up looks like you don't have to do catch up. And if you do that, you'll succeed. Lastly, and although there are so many other caveats on leadership that we all can live by, I ask you to consider this simple rule that I follow. that I tend to take my responsibilities very seriously, sometimes too seriously. But I do not take myself too seriously. It allows communication and openness and participation at a greater level. So I thank you for your time and attention today, and I look forward to your questions at the end of my speech. There will be even some prizes. If you ask a question, I have a prize. Simple as that. So today we will consider innovation, the armor of democracy. And as we celebrate our 250th year of this great experiment, I ask you to consider the innovation, the armor of democracy from 1776 to artificial intelligence. Friends and colleagues and fellow Americans, we often speak of the American dream, but the true genius of our nation is not where we are going, but how we get there. It is a story of relentless and audacious innovation. As Harry Truman once said, America was built on courage, on imagination, and on an unbeatable determination. Today we face new challenges, new crises, and new competitors. But we possess an armor that no other nation can truly replicate. It is not forged in iron, it is forged in intellect. It is not made of steel, it is made of ideas, innovation. It is made of ideas. Innovation itself is the armor of our democracy. Think back to 1776. The world was ruled by kings, emperors, and divine right was how they got things done. Yet a group of audacious colonial innovators did something entirely revolutionary. They declared that all men are created equal and that government derives its legitimacy only from the consent of the government. And after a hard-fought revolution, which we won because of cleverness and tenacity, not because of great battlefield victories, because they were rare and few, when the Articles of Confederation failed, which some of you may know, they didn't surrender to tyranny or anarchy. They instead gathered in Philadelphia under the hammer of our dear great George Washington, who was just dear George Washington at that time, as he had resigned his commission in Annapolis, and engaged in the greatest political, technological, and social experiment in history. What we are, the United States, and how we live, the United States Constitution. That document was not just a charter, it was a masterpiece of political innovation. They invented federalism, splitting sovereignty between states and central power. They engineered checks and balances to ensure that no one person or party or institution could seize absolute power. As Benjamin Franklin suggested, they handed us a republic if we can keep it alive. That same fearless spirit of invention defines our history. Whether you consider Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, who actually owned a patent, by the way, and innovators like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, who just didn't invent products, they invented a better way of life for the common person, strengthening our economy and our democracy. Democracy itself is never a final achievement. It is a call to untiring effort. When we innovate, we arm our republic again against decay. When we create, we renew our freedom. Let us be the generation that renews this armor, ensuring that freedom is the sure possession of those alone who have the courage to defend it. Remember, there are moments in history when the fate of nations is not decided on battlefields alone, not decided on warships, not decided by great rockets or cannons, but in those lonely workshops, in those laboratories, in the libraries, at the dinner table, in the college classroom, and in the quiet corners where men and women dare to ask new questions. The tools a civilization builds determines the world it will inhabit. From a historical standpoint, the printing press shaped revolutions, steam engines reshaped economies, the airplane reshaped warfare, and now cyber algorithms, artificial intelligence, and quantum is shaping the very nature of human decision-making itself and our very lives themselves. But if we look carefully across the dark and troubled paths of history, the way those paths have accelerated, meandered, and it sometimes even halted, from the founding of our republic in 1776 to the emerging age of quantum computing and artificial intelligence, we see something inspiring, simple, and profound. Again and again, in these moments of crisis, great challenge, and in moments of opportunity, innovation has been the force that strengthened our nation, safeguarded our liberty and democracy. Today, I want to reflect on that story, not as a catalog of inventions, but as a reminder that the freedom our nation has always depended on is the creativity of its people. Because every generation has a decision to make, whether it will inherit the future or whether they will build a new one. After all, the American Revolution is often remembered as a war of independence, but it was also a triumph of ingenuity. Those 13 colonies were not the richest societies around at the time by any means. They didn't even have very good armies. In fact, they had pretty bad armies. They weren't old institutions. They were much more developed countries with courtiers and kings and princes that could have developed these clever ideas, but they possessed something far more powerful. They possessed a culture of practical creativity. Farmers who could sustain populations, shipbuilders who could cross oceans, printers who could move ideas faster than armies, and of course simple pamphleteers like the one that Thomas Paine wrote on common sense that inspired the nation at the time. They did not merely inform, they ignited. They carried a radical proposition that ordinary people could govern themselves, and that idea, carried by ink, paper, and courage, became our revolution. From the very beginning, American liberty and American ingenuity grew side by side. We then went into a thing called the War of 1812, which wasn't really the War of 1812 because it lasted longer than that. I always had a tough time dealing with it, and Canada actually won it, but that doesn't matter, okay? A lot of interesting things happened, and we skip over all of them because, there wasn't a real victor, and the Canadians won, right? However, what we did do during that time is we found ourselves blockaded in by the British. But also, interestingly enough, at that time, we didn't have much manufacturing. We were buying all the stuff from London. And, that's how people survived back then. And during that period, we created our own manufacturing. We also created something fabulous called the privateer. And one of the prizes I'm going to give out is a story about Tom Boyle, how he took a ship over to England, put a notice on the coffee shop that was then Lloyd's of London, telling them he was going to raid all the ships in the inland waterways of Britain and capture them all. And the insurance markets went crazy. So, these things were happening back then too, you see. And that book's there. So, during that period, manufacturing expanded, infrastructure began to take shape, industries emerged, not as a convenience, but as a necessity for our very liberty. Innovation was no longer a simple path to prosperity. It had become the very pillars of American sovereignty. Expansion continued as the nation moved westward. Innovation, of course, followed. Railroads stitched together our continent. Telegraph became the way to communicate. Advances in mapping, navigation, and agriculture turned wilderness into organized communities. Then came the gold rush, the Spanish War, further expansion westward. Clever people built a railroad track across Panama so you could sail a ship there, take a railroad and get on another ship and come up the west coast. Transportation systems were built, all this incredible ingenuity and innovation. The Civil War came. It brought about a development in manufacturing, primarily for armaments, sadly, but this led to great expansion into other areas. And the character of conflict, because of the American Civil War, changed dramatically. The Civil War, by the time the Civil War ended, the character of conflict itself had also changed. You probably heard the stories that in Washington, D.C., when the North and the South met, the Confederates met the Union Army, people went out to watch it like it was a picnic. And then they saw the damage done and the pain that they had to endure as modern warfare took hold of our society. That's where we are today to a certain extent. Railroads moved the armies, telegraphs carried command, factories produced at unprecedented scales, and ironclads reshaped the naval warfare. The lesson was unmistakable. And that lesson was the strength of a nation rests not only on the courage of its soldiers, but on the ingenuity of its people. From that moment forward, technology and national power would be inseparable. Most notably, during that period, we had the invention of flight, the 12 seconds that changed our planet forever. Because that's how long the Wright brothers' plane flew for the first time. Only a couple of 100 yards, 12 seconds in the air, and everything changed from then on. Humanity was different. The only thing that possibly compares to it in man's entire existence on this planet is the internet in terms of impact. So they were special when they flew their plane there in North Carolina and Kitty Hawk. I don't know if you've been there, I have. It's an amazing place. They weren't backed by any governments. They had no vast laboratories. They had a bicycle shop. So much the American dream. They had vision, though, and persistence and curiosity. And they had the courage to attempt what others had dismissed. And for 12 seconds, humanity left the ground. But in those 12 seconds, we crossed a massive threshold. Within a generation, flight would connect continents and decide wars. Innovation rarely begins with certainty. It begins with those willing to try. The early 20th century and World War I brought transformation at scale. We had planes dropping bombs. Initially, they had grenades they dropped. They didn't even have a machine gun on the plane. They used to shoot pistols at each other. I mean, reading the history of Red Baron and the Germans and the English and the Americans who flew during this first period, staggering. And of course, the growth of the internal combustion engine was greatly improved because of the need for not horse-drawn anything, because they had to kill 6 million, it's a very sad number, 6 million horses in World War I. Just think about that. Because they couldn't do the work. They replaced them with really bad trucks, really bad engines, but they were better than the poor horses wandering around in the mud. The internal combustion reshaped mobility, and of course there's the great story of Henry Ford, who was successful at first with his manufacturing, but what changed his industry wasn't an improvement in technology, it was an improvement in culture, because he paid his people enough, eventually, so they could buy his products. And as soon as he did, the entire industry changed. Once again, innovation with creativity, because I will tell you that Mr. Ford's competitors complained bitterly about his improving the better of his employees because they didn't think they could do it. This movement in itself literally created the middle class, and opportunities expanded. Mobility increased, and the future became accessible. I will not tell you, because I grew up with an American father who grew up during the Great Depression, that we were not impacted by the Great Depression. You may have all seen the films and so on about it, and it certainly slowed down our innovation. Sadly, on the other side of the water, Mr. Hitler didn't slow down his innovation. And we were left to catch up rapidly under the leadership of Roosevelt during the Second World War, and the many devices and capabilities that were improved because we found ourselves in the very center of the great crucible. And if it had not been for the American manufacturing machine, we would not have won that war. We would have lost. World War II would have been a disaster, but America stepped in with their great might, with the radar, jet propulsion, code breakers at Bletchley Park, early computers, and of course, the Manhattan Project, which many people don't realize was actually a joint effort by the UK and America. Much of the early nuclear work had been done in the UK and secretly brought over to get the Manhattan Project kick-started. Manhattan Project demonstrated something really extraordinary, though, and it was a lesson we continue to learn, that when nations align themselves together, science and industry improve enormously and at astonishing speed. And we've got to redo that approach completely. In so doing, this kind of collaboration and cooperation on innovation can change the course of history as it has done before. During the Cold War, innovation itself became a strategy. And what do I mean by that? Well, some of you may have heard that immediately before the fall of the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin, who at the time had just stepped down as mayor of Moscow, visited officially America. He visited in 1989. And what he discovered when he had his motorcade unexpectedly stop at Randall's grocery store near Houston, he walked into that grocery store, and what he discovered was innovation that he had never seen. And that was vast quantities of groceries on the shelves. And he said to his staff, if the Russian people knew of this, they would not accept it. That was in 1989, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union. All of these things were happening, computers on our desks, videotapes of the real world that had been hidden from the Soviet populace, made them no longer fear the totalitarian rule they had lived under. Of course, satellites and the space race accelerated during that period too, and shortly after, with semiconductors and the shrinking of the computer, we created a thing at the time was called ARPANET, and introduced the radical idea of the internet not only being attached by wires, but being wireless and all around us. The system was born there to share information across the nation, across the world, and the digital age. Freedom and innovation converged. And by the late 20th century, a pattern had become clear that innovation thrives where freedom thrives. Open societies where ideas can be challenged, tested, and shared simply outpaced closed systems. It was no surprise to me when the Soviet Union collapsed, because I was very close to it. And I'd heard from dissenters who had left the Soviet Union, for instance, that there was only one ball bearing manufacturer in the Soviet Union as late as 1986, 1987. And if you don't have ball bearings, you have a really tough time making any kind of industrial product, as some of you may know. So the principle of innovation has been validated again and again. But as we enter a new strategic frontier, we must take a stand and prepare ourselves for cyber systems which underpin our infrastructure, artificial intelligence, which is beginning to make decisions for us, and quantum computing, which promises the breakthrough that we even possibly can't even understand yet. The quantum computer itself will be able to break all of the code that's ever been written once it reaches a certain level, almost instantly. And it threatens our very existence. And although I'm concerned about its innovation, I believe that we will not be isolated from these technologies. And as force multipliers of the things we already do, we will use them for the good. And they will reshape our economies for the better, and reshape our security for the better, and improve the balance of power as long as we as a nation are leading it. But once again, the question emerges, will we lead? History offers a clear answer on innovation. I've given you a brief brushstroke as we walked through this timeline. Societies that encourage curiosity and invest in education, that reward experimentation, that tolerate failure in pursuit of discovery, those societies do not simply adapt to the future. They control and define it. The responsibility of our generation is to recognize that innovation alone is not enough. It must be guided by wisdom, supported by education, and anchored in free institutions. Because technology is not inherently liberating, it still does impact us, and it depends on the shape of the values that we invest in our society. And here lies the enduring lesson of our history. Innovation flourishes where people are free. Free to imagine, free to plan, free to build, free to change their minds, free to fail, and free to disagree, and free to try again. The work of our nation, of the US and our allies, is not easy. And from the shipyards of the 18th century to the factories of the industrial age, to the laboratories of the atomic era, and to the digital network of today, quantum, AI, and the like, innovation has been the one of the great engines of the American experiment. It has been the one great engine of the American experiment that has not failed us. It has constantly strengthened our economy, secured our nation, and expanded opportunity for generations. But it has not been automatic. It has required courage, tenacity, investment, sacrifice, and a belief, and most importantly, faith in a greater being to ensure our success. Every generation has faced this choice: to preserve what was built or to build what has never existed. The American story with pride suggests we are able to do both. Because the same spirit which drove us to these shores 250 years ago and since still lives today. And if we have the wisdom to guide it and the courage to sustain it, then the future will not simply arrive. We will create it. But in this inspiration, some words of caution. As we have discussed today, the luxuries of liberty and the quiet blessings of peace are not accidents of history. They are the results of tireless ingenuity and the conscious choice to be strong. We live in an age where the pace of change is accelerating, and the threats to our way of life are changing with it. Democracy, as our founders understood it, is a living organism. It requires not just our defense, but our constant innovation. If we wish to preserve freedom, we must make our technology the ally of peace. Innovation is the armor that protects democracy, ensuring that strength, rather than fear, guides the future. We must embrace the wisdom of President Ronald Reagan, who put it perfectly when he said, "Peace with freedom is our highest aspiration. A lasting peace anchored by courage, realism, and unity." This is not a philosophy of aggression, but a philosophy of protection. It is the understanding that, as General George Patton put it famously, never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and you will be most surprised by the outcome. We must combine this great American ingenuity with an iron will. We must build better shields, not only just sharper swords. The challenges of tomorrow cannot be solved with the technologies of yesterday. We must be the nation that takes the hard shots, that builds the next generation of security, and that uses the playing of instincts of the human mind to construct a future that is safe, prosperous, and free. As Nelson Mandela reminded us when he struggled so much for freedom in all those years on that little island, it always seems impossible until it is done. As we discussed when I felt challenged today on our education question, I'm willing to relook at it, President. Yeah, it was a lot of energy. As Nelson Mandela reminds us, it always seems impossible until it is done. Let us innovate, not for the sake of power, but for the sake of peace. Let us therefore go forward, not in the fear of our adversaries, but with confidence in our creativity. Let us keep our minds sharp, our innovation relenting, and our democracy armored. For by our strength, we shall keep the peace. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Philip. So I think I remember you promising a couple of prizes to the first few people who asked questions. So
I have
students, now's your time.
I have bribery for questions. This book, Churchill, Americans Arsenal, is about the collaboration between the British and Americans during the Second World War. It happens to be written by a friend of mine, Larry Fierro, and I'm actually credited in the book, but I took him out for lunch. Okay, is the truth of it. So I have 2 copies of that for question answers. You know, they've got to be sensible, not just like what shoes I'm wearing. And I also have the story of Tom Boyle, how he went over to the UK and captured 23 ships and came back to America with all of his prizes. So.
All right, so my question has to do with, I completely agree how innovation has driven a lot of what we have today for our freedoms. But I think there's also a tempering now regarding what responsibility we have to put boundaries around it for safety, trying to take care of others, while at the same time we know our adversaries are not. We know that there are not going to be bounds about things regarding some of our adversaries. How do you view what responsibility we have as we innovate to try to keep things safe for others, while at the same time recognizing that our adversaries aren't?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's 2 discussion points here that I will address. One is the one between us and those institutions that put our children at risk because of social media, which I think is a huge harm being done to society. Unfortunately, yesterday, a judge found that position to be accurate and correct, that I believe they intentionally created products which became addictive and have led to hundreds of deaths, maybe more. And we need to adapt by law the distribution of that type of product in our society, and there should be no question about it, none. And certainly I hope that they will be held fiscally responsible, because they knew exactly what they were doing when they did it. It was with intent they harmed us. And it should be criminal as well, in my opinion. So I hope that addresses that part of it. Now, from a sovereignty standpoint, where we stand, we're in the great game of nations. Right? The great name of nations is, there's 2 nations in the world that count at the moment, sadly. We have our small enemies and we have our big enemy in China. And the truth of the Chinese situation is that on an annual basis, we have a negative balance of payments with them of about $500 billion. In addition to that cost, we also have the fact that every day there are people that they control doing harm to our economies by stealing our IP and attacking our mid-sized businesses. We know that that's happening. And Xi Jinping meets with the president, and they make friendly eyes at each other and come to some sort of bilateral agreement. And to me, that's not enough. Yeah, I wish I could do more. And I would encourage us to do more. There should be a great uprising in this country to recognize that in order for us to be free, we can't just supply ourselves with Chinese-made products. I wish no harm to the Chinese people. They are wonderful people. I've been to China. I've been to Hong Kong. They're great people. But they are ruled by a totalitarian dictatorship that means us harm in the long run. And that's how I feel about it. So, you're welcome. Thank you for the question. What do you want? Do you want Tom Boyle or Churchill's Arsenal? There we go. Come down and get it. I'll sign it for you. Next question.
And since you mentioned about the need for policy development around this, it's fitting then that the next question goes to our director of our new policy lab, Jim Cahill.
Jim.
And then I'll come over.
Jim and I may agree on this.
Thank you, Neil, very much. A wonderful speech. So you talked about technological competition with AI, autonomy, and we have now a term called non-nuclear strategic weapons.
Yep.
So with this competition, we don't have like a framework or the kind of norms that we have with nuclear weapons and conventional weapons. I think it's probably fair to say that.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge risk of a miscalculation that no one wants. So my question is, are you bullish, or do you think that there's a good possibility that we can have an international cooperation, even with our greatest competitors, to prevent that miscalculation that nobody wants?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly hope so. I mean, look, as I believe the president's strategy to be, though it's not clear to anybody, in all honesty, with the Chinese, and that is to continue to trade with them, to try and defend ourselves against IP loss, and according to some people that has been reduced, and to continue working with them until they're, in 2033, they hit a demographic cliff where they will become extremely vulnerable. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's like 40% of their population will be over 75 years old. It's something that extreme. So we need to get through to that point and maintain what we have without surrendering more. And that's why there is such a vigorous effort to return manufacturing to our economy. And in turn, in the weapons that you're referring to, those capabilities, one would hope we would be able to maintain a status quo. That would be my approach if I had authority to do so. I can speak on the topic. I have no authority to influence it. People I hear talk about it who are part of the administration, certainly that's their vision of what's going to happen. Maintain the status quo until we've restored some of our manufacturing to make the playing field a little more even. Continue to buy enough product from China so that we are still their partner, trading partner. In turn, they buy a large amount of our farm products. And if we can continue to do that, those complex engagements continue to keep the ship afloat at least. And they know what they're facing. I mean, they know it well. I mean, they have a demographic cliff in 2027, which is pretty significant, but actually it's much worse 5 years later. Much, much worse. So, sort of not all your question answered, but some of it. Which book do you want? Save them for the students. I will get you one. Okay?
Hi, name is Parker Seaman. I'm part of the cyber defense program. First of all, thank you for being here today.
You're very welcome.
My question is more on the answer to the first question that you gave about China being our biggest adversary, there being a large imbalance between the trade between the two of us.
Yep.
In the amount of the historical reading that I've done, a lot of that has come about from the period of time when a lot of manufacturing and production has gone from done a lot of domestic stuff over to China.
Yep.
And that was done for a lot of economic reasons. It was a lot cheaper to move it over there. One of the main points that you really hit on in your main speech was the importance of investment in our systems to really embolden them and make them strong and resilient. I wonder what your thoughts are on how to reconcile those two things of industry looking to find what is the most efficient, cheapest way to create the product and achieve the goals, and for us to also invest in ourselves. Mm-hmm. I would love to invest in ourselves. I don't have $5 billion to fix the gap myself unless anybody wants to give me a gift. That's my question.
So there are a number of initiatives underway taking on the critical infrastructure issue, which are being funded with venture money and investment, led by J.P. Morgan, amongst others. And this will not only be an effort to make us safer, but also to manufacture those components in the US. So we're actually killing two birds with one stone, right? That right? Yeah. Sometimes I get that expression messed up. I mess a lot of expressions up, actually. So, in terms of our approach to fixing that problem, that is one initiative. And they have a new alliance they formed, which they're funding with a lot of money. I mean, they're planning on raising something like $1.2 trillion in total, but they're feeding $100 billion into it to get it going. And that's being overseen by the Alliance for Critical Infrastructure, which launched like 10 days ago and came out of the Solarium Commission. So leadership from the Solarium Commission went over and set that up. And on the other side, so that's addressing cyber and critical infrastructure and doing it in an entrepreneurial way and sort of living by the American spirit with getting great American companies, Lumens, AT&T, MasterCard, Citibank, Visa, several others have all committed to support this effort. And then manufacturing in general. Well, I mean, I would say that robotics and AI are going to replace some of the rudimentary jobs in our manufacturing so that we will need less people to manufacture things. I'm not sure that's a great thing, but it is the reality of what, the future plan is. So it will make us more efficient. It won't put more people to work necessarily. Some. But we'll bring manufacturing back here. Partially because of that. Okay? So, which book did you want? The Churchill one. Okay. So we're down to the small book on Mr. Boyle.
Yes, my name is Omar. I'm a faculty here at Dakota State. So I guess universities and research centers have been the bastions and engines for innovation. And the US has, I believe, the best model ever that drove innovations to the arguments in the wonderful speech you made. However, in the last, year or so, things have been changing for institutions, especially funding and so forth. So do you see that as a blip and things will kind of get back to where they were as part of the political cycle?
So you are asking me to look at a crystal ball here.
In a sense, something to...
I can give you my personal opinion, and then I can sort of discuss other options. I think that some institutions have been less efficient with their research dollars than they should have been. And I think that we need to share the wealth more. And I really mean that. And I don't want to be like sounds like I'm in the socialist vein, because I'm actually a pretty capitalist conservative type of person. But I think it's just been, badly managed. I mean, we've got some universities that have billions and billions of dollars and they're sitting on it and it's not doing the public good. And the intent was, why they got their tax breaks, was that they would operate for the public good. And I think more accountability should occur for those. And I think, do we need to have, I don't know what the number is for Harvard or some of the bigger institutions, and I've dealt with these people, been in committees with them and so on. And, but I mean, some of them have vast fortunes. And I think that needs to be addressed. I think there was some attempt to do that in a very sort of remedial way by the president, and he was trying to get people to loosen their purse strings and make agreements on things. I think that was part of his intent. For the future, do I think the American model is... I think we have some issues in general. I think that there are incredibly efficient organizations like this one, and there are ones that are less efficient. And I think we have to help the ones that are less efficient get better and serve the ones that are more efficient, reward them more. And how you do that is, I think, with government contracts.
Thank you.
My opinion, so.
Yeah.
I don't think you need a microphone, do you? When? Yeah, so how do we, what happens with our cyber war becoming a kinetic war, right? So this is the issue. And I this is a problem that friends of mine literally wrestle with every day. And there was briefly the authority to take action, but it was withdrawn, as some of you may know, under the last Trump administration, to take action, kinetic action on a cyber attack. And when do we return that ability? And I would tell you that the new cyber strategy, if you've read it from Sean Cairncross's Office of the National Cyber Director, addresses it in language that is flexible, okay? And not only warfare, but physical response and remediation, yeah? And I think we need a better definition on it, but the fact that they've put that out there as a national strategy tells you what direction they're going in. That I think we're close to the point where, where we will seek retribution when our infrastructure and our people are damaged by the actions, intentional actions of cyber attacks that are nation state backed, and we can prove it, right? And I think that we're going that way. And I think that 10 years from now, we'll look back and wonder why we didn't move sooner on that. I think if we drew a line in the sand, that old line in the sand story with President Obama when he drew the line like 19 times, and it weakened us, and then other things bad happened. Well, I mean, you may fault this president, but he's not drawing 19 lines in the sand. That would be my preference. And I'm not a war hawk either, so.
Are we close to digital borders? Are we close to locking ourselves out?
I don't think so. I think that we're close to defining how we will reply if you damage us. We're getting close to the language that will make sense. They're moving towards it. I bet you, and I didn't see the final draft. I saw a very early draft that was going around. I bet, the next cyber strategy will say there's going to be accountability. I hope so. I don't understand what's the difference between dropping a bomb on a community and killing 100 people, or killing 100 people because they die in hospitals around the country because they have been victims of a cyber attack. And it's more than likely some of those things have happened. Because they could be kept quiet rather than create, unfortunately, liability. We all know in the cyber community, far more attacks have occurred than have been reported. We're getting better at it, and in some states it's a law, you've got to report it. And that may happen one day for the nation. It's not my area of expertise. So, sure.
Maybe you have time for one more, if somebody's got a question. Yeah, please.
So going back into the history, I like to think in terms of the UN. We created the League of Nations after the First World War, and then went into the UN after the Second with a more collaborative approach. But in recent years, it's really been on the decline, a lot of faith, and it's been quite ineffective at making any kind of change. Do you see any room for global collaboration and growth in more of a UN kind of a sense? Or
creating a UN for the cyber community, and having the UN engage. I'm not sure what the UN position is on cybersecurity, to be honest.
Okay.
I think that the UN has sadly become highly influenced by people who hate America. I think that's true. And that's very sad because it has great capabilities. But, you would have thought after the fall of the Soviet Union and the sacrifices that were made here, the vast investment by our nation in bringing freedom to the world, we paid for it, others supported it, And yet after the Soviet Union collapsed, I mean, you can look at the pathways that occurred that, we went on forward thinking that, peace was going to be in our time and good times were coming, and we stopped really watching the enemy. Mm-hmm. And then 9/11 happened. A couple of things happened before that should have gotten our attention too. As you know, and I know, not only the attack on the two towers, but the attack in Kenya and destruction of, a lot of American lives. And it's unfortunate we are not, this is, people who come here get to enjoy the greatest nation on earth, in my opinion. I've lived and worked in many different countries. And I may be an American, but I also know our faults. But still, the greatest hope still exists right here. That's why people come. Again and again, they make the decision to come to America and enjoy the freedom at a level that's just staggering. Nowhere else has this. Not for 350 million people. There may be tiny little nations with 100,000 population or 5 million who have quite nice lifestyles, but nothing like America. So I hope that we will be able to negotiate some sort of agreement that will allow cybersecurity to come under the auspices of a United Nations-like organization to give greater freedom and access to information and opportunity. That would be a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, let's thank Philip one more time. It's lovely to have you here, and what a broad-ranging talk. Thanks very much. Thanks so much for coming. Board of Regents will be on campus next week. There's still a lot going on, so we'll see you around campus. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
DakotaCon starts tomorrow.